Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So guys, I saw this video by Thom Hartmann today where Thom Hartmann beats the stuffing out of this right-winger on the Trump tax cuts. Personally, I think those tax cuts are indefensible, and Thom Hartmann, whatever you want to think about Thom Hartmann, and yes, I have a soft spot for the guy. He eviscerates the guy. So I want to show the clip because Thom Hartmann, there's no defense. Like, it gets sad at a certain point where Thom Hartman's just punching the guy in the gut over and over and over and over again. And he's just kind of laying there, like, you know, just twitching and whatnot. So let's take a look at this. I have a soft spot for Thom Hartmann, and let me explain why. When I first started having my political awakening and I started paying attention more to politics, the first person I can remember voting for is Ralph Nader. And this I wasn't even politically active like talking about. I was just kind of in this thing of, I hear what these other guys are saying. This guy seems more earnest to me. I'm picking this guy. Now, the reason I say that, at a certain point, I started becoming very aware of politics and very aware of the politics that was going on around me. And I was an avid Democrat at the time. I'm ashamed of that to no end. I was an avid Democrat. And I remember having this conversation with this guy who wasn't a Democrat. He wasn't anything. He was like an independent. And he's bringing up one issue after the next in regards to what was a failure by the party, meaning the party said one thing and the party failed in regard to the things that they were saying. And even at that time, it never really occurred to me of, wait a minute, this guy's right. These guys are full of it. During this time, Thom Hartmann was one of those guys that I gravitated towards because I liked his calm demeanor, and I like he was just fucking fact sheet. Like, the amount of information that the guy could recall is amazing. I mean, talking Thomas Jefferson, talking about ancient history in regards to other countries. Say what you want about the guy. You may call the guy a hack and all this other stuff, but I would not tread lightly on Thom Hartmann. And if you're gonna have a debate with Thom Hartmann, you better come prepared. This right winger did not come prepared. So let's take a look at the guy. Let's see.
Messina, the host of The Real Side with Joe Messina. TheRealSide.com is the website. You can tweet him at at Joe Messina, MESSINA, or at The Real Side. Joe, welcome back to the program. It's been a while.
Oh, been a while. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. You might want to turn your gain down just a little bit. It sounds like it's distorting on the way in here. In 1921, Warren Harding ran on a campaign of he was going to cut the 91% tax rate that had kept America strong and prosperous through the aughts and the teens and the early 20s. And he did so in 22. And that led right straight to the crash of the stock market in 1929. In 81 and 86, Reagan passed a giant tax cut, and that led right to the largest stock market crash in 1987 since 1929. George W. Bush does the same thing in 2001, and or in 2002 actually, early 2002, as a stimulus for the 9/11, and that leads right to the crash of 2008. Why do you guys keep doing this to us?
Okay, we keep doing it to you because we don't have a Congress, we don't have a legislature that gets involved with it. But I think this is hilarious, Tom. I mean, we've looked at a year of growth in the stock market. We looked at a year of growth economically. We've got
well, those are two different things.
Manufacturing's up. Just on the fact that he's talking about doing this for the tax break. Do you not want the middle class to have a tax break? I mean, even the left-leaning publications are saying that 80% of middle class will get a tax break. Some of them as high as $4,000. Why is this a bad thing?
So Joe, number one, you didn't answer my question. And number two, what this tax bill that just passed the House of Representatives does over the next 10 years.
By the way, just to inject something here, there's a massive difference between this idea of the stock market doing well versus the idea of everybody else doing well. When you give millionaires and billionaires tax cuts, they don't make jobs just for the sake of making jobs. They don't say, I'm just going to make a job for social need. They make jobs because they have a job that they need to make in order to make some kind of profit. They make those things based upon need, not just for this kind of social benefit. Saying that the stock market is doing well is not the same thing as saying that the economy is doing well. What about the number of people who are in poverty? What about the number of people who are in desperate poverty? What about the number of people who need Medicare or medical assistance, or the people who need some kind of financial assistance, meaning, food stamps and those type of things? There are elements of your society that you can go by. They're trying to come up with metrics to make the determination on the wellness and the health of your society. Stock market may be one of those things, but it is not the thing. It is not the thing. This idea of the rich having huge amounts of cash where they're just dropping this into the stock market is not indicative of the wealth of your society. This is a extraordinarily biased perspective in regards to, hey, the stock market is doing great, so everybody else is doing just fucking awesome. The last thing I read, I think it was over 60% of the people in this country, if they had a bill for $500, would not be able to afford that bill. That is not indicative of your country doing well, and that is not indicative of the people in that society doing well. That is the opposite. That is the opposite. Not to mention, people going into massive amounts of debt in order to just to keep on this hamster wheel. Their wages have went nowhere, and the massive amount of debt that these people have taken on. If your wages aren't going up, and you've gone into massive amounts of debt just to keep ends meet, just to make ends meet, in order to go to college, in order to take medical schools, medical bills, all of these things, these just basic things of life, you've gone into massive amounts of debt just to be on a treadmill. How is that indicative of your society doing well? How? Let's keep going. I guess my point is, Thom Hartmann is right. The wealth of a society, or the health of a society, is not purely indicative of just of the stock market. There are other factors in your society dealing with everybody else in the society. I mean, the overwhelming majority of stocks, I think it's like 80%, is only held by 1% of the population. So think about that. So if you're bringing in the stock market, you're talking about a very select few of people who you're saying are doing magnificently well. That's not representative of the health of your society. Let's just keep going.
Is it transfers a little over $5 trillion from the pockets of the bottom 90% of Americans into the pockets of the top 0.1% of Americans, most of it going to the pockets of the top 1,000th of 1%. Of that $5 trillion transfer, $3.5 trillion is coming directly out of the pockets of presumably people like you and me, people who are not multimillionaires and billionaires. And $1.5 trillion of it is coming from our children and our grandchildren. It's being borrowed and added to the national debt. I don't understand, if the average middle-class person is sitting around going, boy, I'm really happy because I'm getting a $1,000 tax break this year, and it's being borrowed, and my grandchildren are going to have to pay for it, and the billionaires are getting 84% of all the benefit from this thing is going to less than 1/100th of 1% of Americans. It seems to me like this is just the Koch brothers repayment bill.
Yeah, I love you socialist Democrats. You guys are just wonderful. You finally learned how to spell the word budget. You had no problem with us tacking on $10 trillion in deficit to my great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. That didn't seem to bother you at all.
Joe, it wasn't.
And by the way, Thom Hartmann is right by this. You guys are deficit hawks. You guys have spent the last 50 years screaming at the top of your lungs about the deficit. Now, at one point, if you're talking about Eisenhower, who I think he raised the tax rate up to like 90% because he wanted to pay back the debt, he believed it. He was a true believer. But honestly, do you honestly believe that Paul Ryan, Donald Trump, all these Republicans that are in office now, these guys who screamed at the top of their lungs that they couldn't raise the debt by 1 red cent and was willing to go over the fiscal cliff in order to prevent the debt from being raised, only being saved at the last minute? Do you realize that they marked, the credit agency marked the United States down on this? Essentially, they downgraded our rating, which is amazing, but they downgraded our rating based on the behavior that the United States or that the Republican Party was taking in this regard. It's peculiar to me that if these guys are actually deficit hawks, they full well believe that I would bleed on the flag before I put 1 red cent on the back of my grandkids. If they do this, if they talk in this way, fair enough. Then explain to me that when Donald Trump takes office and they raised that debt limit by $9 trillion, they had no issue raising it when Donald Trump took office. They didn't do it when Obama took office. I mean, the argument that they made was we didn't want to raise the debt limit, but they did it when Trump took office by $9 trillion. That's with the T, mind you. And now they're upping the ante. And they're giving this massive transfer of wealth to the top 1%, including putting $1.5 trillion on the debt. And Thom Hartmann is kind of making this point of, where are the deficit hawks? Where are the deficit hawks? If you guys are these massive deficit hawks, if the things that you guys really cared about was a deficit, why are you guys so casual in the way that you guys raised this deficit by $9 trillion? And why are you so casual putting $1.5 trillion on the backs of the American public? It is one thing to say that you are going to do a budget that's somewhat deficit neutral, even if you're stealing services away from the poor, the middle class, in order to pay for those things and give those things to the top 1%. It's one thing if you can say it's deficit neutral. You can't say it's deficit neutral. You're adding $1.5 trillion on the backs of the rest of everybody else in this country. Thom Hartmann has a point. And no, he didn't answer that question directly at all. Let's take a listen. Let's keep going. You have to stop. I mean, it's almost like you have to keep interjecting because he's spitting a bunch of bullshit. But let's keep going.
Joe, excuse me. Hang on just a second. You can't concatenate a bunch of untruths here. It wasn't Democrats. It wasn't Democrats who did a tax break that added $1 trillion to the national deficit. It wasn't Democrats who lied us into a war in Afghanistan that added $2 trillion to the deficit. It wasn't Democrats who lied us into a war in Iraq that added another $2 trillion to the deficit. But what Barack Obama did was he took these two wars that George W. Bush did and left them off the budget, and Obama put them on the budget. These were Bush's deficits. You know this, Joe.
No, actually, I don't know it. I don't know how much money Mr. Obama moved around. We're just finding out some of the scandalous Obama, what he's actually pulled off with money over the years, right?
That is complete nonsense.
Let's go
Give
back
me one example of what you're talking about.
Well, how about the money that went to Iran? And he said himself, you have it on video, so you can't deny it, where he said himself, because of American laws, I couldn't just give them the money. I had to load up planes.
It was their money.
This is massively disingenuous. Somebody asked me, they was like, why don't you have right wingers on your show to hash out some of this stuff? I was like, I don't want these people on my show making this stupid ass arguments. Thom Hartmann is right. I mean, he's perfectly right. Yes, Obama instantiated, 80% of those Bush tax cuts into law, so fair enough. He kind of skipped over that part, but whatever. He's in debate at this point. Yeah, Obama took the money from Bush because Bush didn't put that stuff on the books, and he put it on the books. And Republicans pointed to Obama and said, see, look at what he did to the debt. He raised the debt by trillions of dollars. Again, massively disingenuous. Massively disingenuous. And yeah, that's massively disingenuous. And again, Thom Hartmann is right. The money from Iran belonged to Iran. That was not our money. That was not our money. His argument here is you shouldn't have given Iran its money. You should have just kept it. America should have just stolen this other country's money. That's an amazing argument to make, but that is the argument that this right-winger is making. By the same token, it's not that far-fetched from Donald Trump making the argument that we should have just stole the oil from Iraq. It's right-wingers. They don't care about this stuff. Reality has nothing to do with it.
It doesn't matter. He didn't have
it
the
was
right
their
to give
money.
it to
Are
them
you
at the
saying,
time.
Joe, that if you go to the bank and you say, I'd like to withdraw $1,000, would you please give it to me in cash, that the bank should say no?
But wait a minute. Were the Iranians without any kind of responsibility for what
This
they did?
was the Iranians' money. They had this money in American banks when the Iranian Revolution happened. And by the way, why are we talking about this? I started by asking you why Republicans constantly want to screw the middle class and give the money to the super rich. How long are you guys going to continue doing this to us? I'm assuming forever.
Didn't JFK do a tax plan?
JFK proposed a tax plan.
Okay, so he never.
Lyndon Johnson did it in '64.
Changes to it. All right, and then we get back to God. I've lost my train of thought. It's a great discussion, but I lost my train of thought.
JFK actually, and you know, I realize most Republicans don't know this because JFK's name gets used in vain and all.
This is not a great discussion, by the way. This is an adult punching a toddler in the face. This guy has no idea what the fuck he's talking about. Either he's lying or he doesn't know. I don't necessarily know which one. I don't even know which one is worse. But this was the B League. Thom Hartmann brought on the B League. It's like varsity playing junior varsity. Let's keep going. He's spinning nonsense.
An awful lot, you know, tragically. But JFK actually wanted taxes to go up and said so in this debate. Hang on just a second. I've got a clip of it actually.
Let me ask you a question though, Tom. You know, under President Obama, the rich got richer. I mean, and that's from the New York Times. That's from the Huffington Post. You can find those articles all over the place. And one article talks about 95% of the wealth being created under Obama went to the 1%ers. I didn't hear you complaining about that, or was that all lies, and that's why you didn't complain about it?
That's the structure of our economy, but this does not.
What the hell ever? Those things are done by choices. It's the structure of our economy. Bullshit. Bullshit. You can make an argument that our economy is set a particular way, but you're acting like these things are laws of God. These things are not laws of God. These things are choices that presidents and Congress, choices that these guys make. That guy's right. 95% of the wealth did go to the top 1%. It's a bullshit argument because ultimately he's just throwing that in just for this kind of to muddy the waters in a sense. But Thom Hartmann, yeah, he's right. This wasn't something that Thom Hartmann necessarily bitched and moaned about. And Thom Hartmann, even in this case, gave Obama a pass in the way he's making this argument. He's like, well, I mean, that's the structure of the economy. Okay, well, this massive tax hike that Trump is doing is a structure of the economy, or this massive tax cut. He instantiated 80% of the Bush tax cuts into law. Those ghastly, horrible, disgusting Bush tax cuts that Democrats couldn't stand and that they said was a tax hike, a heist. He enshrined those things in the law. So if Thom Hartmann is going to be fair and Thom Hartmann is going to be honest when he's having this conversation, and look, Thom Hartmann, for the most part, is right, the overwhelming majority of this conversation. But in no way should he give Obama a pass on this. 95% of the wealth going to the top 1% under the Democratic president that was supposed to be a quote-unquote progressive is a failure. That's called a failure. Call it what it is. That's a failure. That's a failure. That in no way, however, in no way gives Donald Trump a pass in the way that he's about to rape the American public. Those things have nothing to do with each other. Mitch McConnell one day was giving this argument about why Obamacare was horrible. And in the middle of this conversation, this argument, if that's what you want to call it, this argument, he says it doesn't even cover everybody. So you'd be okay with it if it did cover everybody, Mitch? Sometimes people throw shit in the arguments, just to throw stuff in the arguments to muddy the waters and force the other person to respond to the thing that came out. He was able to hit you in the knees on this, Tom, because ultimately people who are looking at this understand that you backpedal on this conversation. If you're going to make this conversation that Donald Trump is doing things and he's taking policy positions that's allowing the rich to massively advantage themselves at the expense of the rest of the country. And he just said to you that Obama was in office and gave 95% of the wealth to the top 1%. And your response to that is, I understand what Trump is doing, but this is just the structure of the government in regards to Obama. That's not the structure of the government, Tom. Those are choices that were made by Democrats and the president in that office. And those choices allowed 95% of the wealth to go to the top 1%, meaning the 1% massively advantaged itself while this president was in office. And right now, you're taking this guy to task for Donald Trump doing the same thing, just worse. Be fair.
You're still not answering my question. What, you know, I get it that the Republicans want to pay back the billionaires who put them into office.
I don't know who got hurt, but I made a lot of money under Reagan on the new tax bill. I'm not going to get taxed any more money here in California. The only thing, the California loons are causing me headaches because, you know, not only do they blow the money that they've already charged us to fix the freeways and the highways, now they go put 12% more per gallon on per gallon of gasoline. Now they want to charge us by mile. You know, when the Dems get total control of something, it's like they can never get enough of your money. I love it. I think it's hilarious.
Right, and the Republicans would simply rather borrow it from our grandchildren and put it on the bill and take it out of the pockets of children's health insurance. I mean, this is the most obscene. Joe Messina, this is the most obscene thing I've ever seen. They are knocking 9 million children off the children's health insurance program. 13 million people are going to lose their health insurance through Obamacare. And people like you are bragging about this. What the hell is wrong with your morality, Joe?
Wait a minute. You're saying you want to go back and fine people for not having enough money to have health insurance, right? And that is such a misleading statement when you say they're being thrown off of health care. No, now they have a choice. Before they didn't have a choice. People who didn't have money have to pay fines and fees. My granddaughter, under that wonderful, illustrious Obamacare program, her medication went from $78 to $288. Sorry, buddy, it's happening in my house, and it was wrong.
So you think? So you?
This argument is weird on two fronts. So on, and I mean for both of them, by the way, not just for one or the other. I halfway agree with him on this. The other half, not so much. This argument of you have the freedom to die without health care is a ridiculous argument to me. That's not a freedom. Nobody wants that freedom to die without health care. Nobody wants the freedom to die without food or anything else. It's like, that's not really a freedom per se. Anytime somebody uses the term freedom, freedom for what? Or freedom for who and to do what? You're giving a massive tax cut. And you're getting rid of the mandate. And in getting rid of that mandate, a ton of people, millions of people are going to lose their healthcare coverage. So Thom Hartmann is somewhat right. At the same token, let's be honest. If healthcare was done right the first time, you wouldn't have had all these people being thrown off the rolls because there would have been no individual mandate in the first place. You would have actually had this kind of either public option or universal healthcare. You've forced people into this marketplace where these people are stuck with these massive exorbitant costs, while at the same token having these costs to go up. You're forced to get health care from a private insurer, and the cost of that health care continues to go up. I'm sorry, Tom. The guy who you're backing up on this didn't do a good job on the healthcare thing. I mean, ultimately, Democrats like to talk about their values and everything else. What are the values of a party who is perfectly okay with throwing 20 million people off the rolls, or having 20 million people not have health care after going through the process of actually putting through some kind of health care plan, screaming the entire way that this is universal health care when it was in no way universal health care? I'm just trying to make this point that the situation to which Thom Hartmann is arguing right now is about the individual mandate. When that individual mandate is gotten rid of, a lot of people are going to lose their health care insurance. Now, Donald Trump is trying to say that this is effectively getting rid of Obamacare. This is not getting rid of Obamacare at all. But let's be honest, with those people who don't have a mandate, those people are going to lose their health care coverage. At the same token, the mandate shouldn't have been part of the thing in the first place. If you want people to get health care, you don't proclaim it like a king. You make it possible for the people to have health care, where it becomes one of those things where everybody has health care. This is not something that King Obama, is going to proclaim that unless you get health care, you're going to get a penalty associated with it. Universal health care. Hell, even having a public option would have in many respects solved this issue of these prices going bananas and through the roof. And it would have solved a lot of this issue of having the Republican Party being able to dismantle Obamacare in the way that they've been dismantling it with these prices spiking. I'm making this point that this goes both ways. Yes, getting rid of the individual mandate is going to lose people a lot of health care, and I don't believe that people dying without health care is a freedom that people want. By the same token, have Obamacare being half-assed in a way that it's half-assed. You've allowed these pieces that can be picked apart and pulled apart. So one of the things that people hate about the healthcare law is the individual mandate. And what is the thing that Republicans attack? The individual mandate. And why not? Why not? You've proclaimed that people should get health care, and you've proclaimed that you're going to put a penalty on those people if those people don't get health care. And Republicans say, hey, you don't like this individual mandate? We're going to get rid of this individual mandate. You're welcome. You're welcome. You have the freedom to die without health care like essentially dogs or animals in the street. Thom Hartmann is never going to own this one. He's never, I don't think, and to be fair, I haven't watched Thom Hartmann's show in a while, so I don't necessarily know the line he toes on this. But just in this conversation, he's taken this position that removing the individual mandate is the same thing as people being thrown off the healthcare rolls. I think it's fair to say that's somewhat debatable. I don't know if it's the exact same thing as people being thrown off the healthcare rolls, but I would say, though, that the rates and the spiking of these rates is problematic. And much of that has to do with the defects in the law itself. If you're going to do a law like that, you should put people at the forefront of that law, meaning lowering drug costs, or lowering the cost of these guys going to the doctors, getting these leeches, these healthcare system programs, or these health insurance companies out the mix. These things are leeches. The goal in this should have been lower healthcare costs for the individual Americans in this country, not to protect healthcare companies and drug companies. There's a difference in those things. The argument that's being had here, both of them to some degree I would argue are wrong. Nobody wants a freedom to die without healthcare. Some may want it, but ultimately that's not a freedom that's good for anybody to have. By the same token, if the health bill was done right the first time, and if you, at the very least, at the very tepid least, a public option, a lot of this could have been head off at the pass. But that's not where we are, so let's keep going.
You think that if you don't like, you know, for example, if you didn't have kids in the public schools, you don't think you should have to pay property taxes?
No, I didn't. Did I say that?
Well, the philosophy that I just heard you articulating is, I got mine, screw you. We are not a society. We are a collection of individuals, to quote Margaret Thatcher.
I don't live high on the, wait a minute. I don't live high on the hog by any stretch of the imagination, okay?
I wasn't suggesting you were. What you were saying was basically, if we as a society decided that it is better for America, for Joe, for Tom, for all Americans, it's better for America, for everybody to have health insurance. So if somebody gets in a car accident, all the rest of us don't have to pay for it. If somebody gets tuberculosis and it's contagious, and by the way, we have an epidemic happening worldwide with hotspots in New York and Los Angeles, then everybody can have access to medicine. If we decide that, and the price to pay for that is the people who choose not to have medicine are going to have to pay a $75 a year fee, I'm fine with that. It works.
No, I'm not.
It works
I'm not
in
fine
countries
with charging
all over the world.
I'm not fine with charging somebody who can't even buy food.
Let's be very clear what we're talking about. Obamacare is not universal health care. Saying it works all over the world gives this kind of false impression that Obamacare is being used across the world. Many of these countries have universal health care. You're born in that country, you die in that country. From the day that you're born, you have health care. You don't have these bills following you around and all this other stuff. Even with Obamacare, people are going into bankruptcies. I understand that Thom Hartmann is the argument that he's making on this. This is one of those least worst arguments. Obamacare is not great, but at the very least, it's better than what the Republicans want to do. And yes, he's right. From the standpoint of should we get rid of people's health care in order to give other rich people, plutocrats, a tax cut? Fuck no. Fuck no. So he's right. But come on. Come on. This bill wasn't built with this idea of how can we do this that's best for human beings, that's best for actual people. It wasn't done with this thing of let's look at the way the best do this, let's look at what they're doing around the world to find ways to do it. No. They picked the Romney program. It was done in somewhat of a half-assed way. It wasn't done from the standpoint of people. It was done purely through ideological lenses or ideological terms. Trump Care, also done purely through ideological terms. It has nothing to do with the public itself. I don't understand Democrats who have this utopian vision that you can have, you know, everybody get their profits and yet people are going to have this awesome health care. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. You make a choice. Do you want to represent the interests of human beings and people, or do you want to represent the interests of markets and profits? The Democrats made the choice to do markets and profits. And in this case, they left insurance companies in the mix. And these insurance companies, these leeches, are raping the public to a tune of whatever that number is. I think they're supposed to get 30% or something to that effect. Tom, they shouldn't be part of the process. And I suspect Thom Hartmann would agree with this, but Thom Hartmann is fighting for Obamacare and he's fighting to back up the legacy to some degree. So fair enough. But come on, Tom, let's be honest. If Obamacare worked the way Obamacare was supposed to work, you wouldn't have all these moving pieces. You wouldn't have people being put in a situation of paying a penalty and everything else. The person would be born, the person would die, and the person would just have health care. They would just have health care. If you're going to take that much of a lift in order to put through healthcare, then you should do healthcare right. And you should make sure that people are taken care of and people are covered in this process. And going with this idea of trying to force people to pay a penalty or trying to force people to buy from a private enterprise, and those private enterprises, the prices are spiking. And I know you would say, well, that's Republicans' fault. Some of this might be Republicans' fault, fair enough, but Democrats allowed them the opportunity to do this. So So let's be honest. Let's be fair.
Food for their home and fining them every year on their taxes. That's
If you can't buy
crazy.
food for your home, you're not getting a fine, number one. And number two, you know, again, you find these straw man arguments. It's just astonishing to me.
And listen to you on the tax bill, right? You're talking about California and especially New York. Look at, if you've got the money to have a $2, $3, $4, $5 million home. I sat next to a Republican over the weekend. I hear the music. We can continue this.
Yeah, we got to wrap it up. We got to wrap it up. Joe Messina, he is the host of The Real Side. TheRealSide.com is the website. You can tweet him at The Real Side or at Joe Messina, Messina.
Yeah, Thom Hartmann is not a slouch in a debate. I think he undermined him a little bit when he brought up the whole thing of Obama giving 95% of wealth to the top 1%, because there is no good answer for that as a Democrat. There is zero good answer for that. Like, it's just the structure of the economy. Structure of the economy, my ass. Or the laws created by God, or the laws voted for by the human beings who are in the presidency and who are in Congress. Did Democrats have a supermajority in the Senate? And did they have a majority in the House? Both of those things are yes. Did they have the opportunity to pass the Free Employee Act or the bill that would have allowed laborers or labor unions to form far easier? The answer is yes. The argument that Thom Hartmann is making is that this is purely this idea of the structure and the edifice of government itself that it forced 95% of the wealth to go to the top 1%. But in Donald Trump's cases, Donald Trump is making decisions and Republicans are making decisions that are going to give massive amounts of wealth to the top 1%. If the latter are choices, then the former were also choices. That's my point. Yeah, I mean, this was the entirety of the debate. I put the link at the bottom so you guys can see it. Yeah, he's weak when he's defending Obama on this, because I think Thom Hartmann is further to the left, but ultimately he's also a Democrat, so he feels he needs to defend his side. The problem is some of the stuff that he's attacking you on is stuff that your side is also doing. So it's like, but again, the argument that the guy is making doesn't really apply here. Like, he's making an argument that has nothing to do with the conversation that they're having. Yes, you can say, well, Thom Hartmann was okay with Obama giving 95% of the wealth to the top 1%, but what does that have to do with this grotesque, disgusting tax bill that you yourself are on here supporting as if it's a great fucking thing? If you need to look at this again in its entirety, he had no answers for any of this stuff. He had zero answers. There is no defense to this bill, at least no good defense. And this guy, and maybe there's somebody else who can defend this better than this guy did, but this looked abysmally bad. This looks really bad, so I will leave it at that. It's late, and so this was not necessarily done as good as I would have wanted it to be done, but I'm pushing it up anyway. It's like 3 in the morning. So, alright guys, if you enjoyed the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through Patreon. Thanks guys.